Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep for this deep dive. We're looking at a YouTube video. It's called Hypatia, History, Politics, and Religious Zeal, and it's from the channel Astrology, A Look Inside.
Interesting title.
Yeah, and, you might be thinking, what does a 5th century, philosopher have to do with modern politics? I mean, that's quite a stretch. But this YouTuber sees some unsettling parallels between Hypatia's story and current events, like right now in 2025. So that's what we're going to be looking at today.
Yeah, it is a fascinating blend of, like you said, history, but then also like personal reflection and a touch of, shall we say, passionate commentary on the state of affairs in the world today.
All right, so first things first, who was Hypatia? Yeah. I'll admit my ancient history is a little rusty.
Well, imagine Alexandria.
Yeah.
In the 400s AD, It was a huge melting pot of cultures and ideas, and Hypatia was right at the center of it all. Think of her as a rock star, philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician, all rolled into one.
Wow.
She even invented the ASTROLABE, which was this intricate tool used to map the stars, kind of like an ancient GPS for the cosmos, you could say.
Wow, a GPS for the stars. That's pretty impressive. So I'm sensing this woman was way ahead of her time.
Absolutely. And that's part of what makes her story so tragic. Hypatia was brutally murdered by a mob driven by religious extremism.
Oh, wow.
It's a stark reminder of how fear and intolerance can extinguish even the brightest minds,
So we have this brilliant woman, a pioneer in science and philosophy, silenced by forces that couldn't handle her intellect. But then this YouTuber makes a leap, right?
Yeah.
She connects Hypatia's fate to the current political climate, especially anxieties surrounding the new president's policies.
Yes, and it's a connection rooted in some very specific anxieties. The YouTuber expresses deep concern that the president's policies will disproportionately impact vulnerable populations, like the elderly, the poor, and people of color.
Yeah, she even uses the word genocide. I mean, that's a very loaded term, isn't it?
It certainly is. And it's worth noting that genocide throughout history has often been preceded by a dehumanization of certain groups, labeling them as other or a threat to society.
Interesting. So the YouTuber might be drawing a parallel between that historical pattern and what she perceives is happening now.
Exactly. She points to specific policies like the dismantling of social safety nets and potential cuts to Social Security as evidence of this potential harm.
She also claims the president issued a directive to avoid hiring people of color. That's a pretty serious allegation. Do we have any context for that?
That particular claim seems to be based on anecdotal evidence rather than verified reports. It's crucial to separate verifiable facts from speculation, especially when dealing with such sensitive issues.
Right, because even though this is just one YouTuber's perspective, these claims could easily spread and fuel further anxieties.
Absolutely, and that's where critical thinking becomes so important. We need to examine the evidence, consider different perspectives, and avoid jumping to conclusions.
Okay, so back to the YouTuber's concerns. She paints a pretty bleak picture of the future, comparing the current situation to the French Revolution.
Yes, she even evokes Marie Antoinette and that infamous "let them eat cake" line.
Right.
She seems to be suggesting that the current administration is similarly out of touch with the struggles of everyday people.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from ancient Alexandria to pre-revolutionary France. I'm sensing a theme here.
The YouTuber seems to be using history as a lens to understand and perhaps amplify her fears about the present. It's as if she's saying, look, this has happened before, and it could happen again.
But isn't comparing a modern democracy to a monarchy a bit of a stretch? I mean, we have systems in place to hold our leaders accountable.
That's a fair point. While historical analogies can be thought-provoking, it's important not to oversimplify complex situations. The context is key.
So we're seeing this blend of historical parallels and present-day anxieties, all channeled through the lens of this YouTuber's personal perspective.
And it's important to remember that this is just one interpretation of events. We're presenting it to you, not as a definitive truth, but as a window into the fears and concerns that some individuals are grappling with.
Yeah, it's like we're getting a glimpse into how this YouTuber is processing the anxieties of our time, using history to make sense of the present.
Precisely. And that in itself is fascinating. It highlights how our individual experiences and beliefs shape our understanding of the world around us.
Speaking of personal experiences, she brings up this term, witch's wound, which I found really intriguing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but it's a very evocative term.
It's a powerful metaphor for the historical persecution of women, particularly those who were deemed different or threatening to the established order. Think of women who were healers, midwives, or simply those who dared to challenge societal norms.
Okay, so it's not just about literal witch hunts, but about the broader societal anxieties surrounding powerful women throughout history.
Exactly. And the YouTuber seems to be connecting this concept to Hypatia's story, suggesting that she too was a victim of this fear of female intellect and power.
And then it takes an even more personal turn because she shares her own belief that she might have been a witch in a past life.
Wow.
And that this fuels her present-day anxieties.
It's a fascinating glimpse into how personal beliefs can shape our perceptions of current events. In a way, she's projecting her own fears onto the historical narrative, finding resonance between Hypatia's fate and her own sense of vulnerability.
That's a really interesting point. It's almost as if, for her, history isn't just something in the past. It's a living force that's shaping the present and potentially even dictating the future. So she sees it as a very living thing. It's not just something that happened way back when. It's something that's affecting us now.
Yeah, and that leads us to the final piece of the puzzle, the astrolabe. Remember that remarkable instrument that Hypatia invented?
Oh, right. The ancient GPS for the stars?
Exactly.
What does that have to do with all of this?
Well, the YouTuber sees it as a symbol of human ingenuity and progress.
Okay.
But she also sees it as something that is under threat in the current climate of fear and intolerance.
So it's like she's saying we're regressing, abandoning reason, and sliding back into darkness.
She laments that history seems to be repeating itself and expresses a deep fear that society is erasing advancements and losing sight of what truly matters.
Okay, so we have Hypatia, the brilliant mind, silenced by intolerance, and this YouTuber who sees those same forces at play in our time. It's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is.
But at least there's a call to action, I guess.
But she doesn't end on a note of complete despair. She urges listeners to engage politically, to hold their elected officials accountable, and to fight for a better future.
So amidst all the anxiety, there's a glimmer of hope. A call to action.
Yes. It's a reminder that we're not powerless in the face of these challenges. We can choose to engage, to resist, to shape the course of events.
All right, then. Let's keep diving.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this YouTuber weaves these seemingly disparate threads. Ancient history, personal anxieties, current political figures, like all these different things into a narrative that feels both really compelling, but also concerning.
It's like she's building a case, using Hypatia's story as a foundation and then layering on all these modern day anxieties to create this sense of impending doom. It's pretty heavy stuff. But I'm curious, though, how much of this is rooted in verifiable facts versus, her subjective interpretation?
That's where the critical thinking comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get swept up in the emotion, especially when the language is so vivid and the imagery is so stark. But it's important to kind of step back for a second and examine the claims being made. Separate, what are the verifiable facts and what are the subjective interpretations?
Okay, so let's put on our critical thinking caps here for a moment. What stands out to you as potentially needing further scrutiny?
Well, for instance, she claims that the president's policies will lead to mass genocide. I mean, that's a huge accusation and one that would require substantial evidence to support it, right? I think tossing around such a weighty term without a deeper understanding of what actually constitutes genocide can trivialize the very real historical atrocities that it represents.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, she does give those examples of policies that she believes will harm vulnerable populations, like, dismantling social safety nets, potential cuts to Social Security. But are those examples enough to justify such a claim?
That's where we need to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the potential impact of these policies, both the intended and unintended consequences. It's a complex issue, and reducing it to a simple claim of genocide might be oversimplifying the situation.
So we're not saying she's wrong, but we're also not just accepting it as fact without, digging a little deeper, investigating a little bit. It's about acknowledging the anxiety she's expressing, but while also engaging in a critical analysis of her claims.
Yeah, precisely. And that applies to many of the assertions she makes throughout the video. For instance, she alleges that the president directed his staff to avoid hiring people of color.
Right. But is there any historical precedent for that? I mean, how does this allegation fit into the broader political landscape?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? Without verifiable sources or corroborating information, it remains an allegation, not a proven fact.
Wow.
And it's important to remember that in a world of such rapid information flow, not everything we see or hear online is accurate or representative of the whole picture.
Yeah, and that's something we have to constantly remind ourselves of, especially these days when things are changing so quickly.
Right.
And then there's that whole comparison to Marie Antoinette, which is such a powerful image. But is it an accurate reflection of what's happening now? Are things really that dire?
Analogies can be helpful tools for understanding complex issues, but they can also be misleading if they're stretched too far. Is the current administration truly exhibiting the same level of callous disregard for the poor and vulnerable as, the French monarchy before the revolution? That's a question that merits careful consideration and not, just a knee-jerk reaction.
It seems like she's tapping into this, primal fear of history repeating itself, using these historical parallels to amplify the sense of urgency and danger. It's almost as if she's saying, if we don't act now, we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, and that's a powerful rhetorical technique. By invoking these echoes of the past, she's essentially saying, look, this has happened before, and it could happen again if we're not careful. But we must be wary of falling into the trap of thinking that history is a simple linear path.
Right. It's not just a simple case of this happened then, therefore it will happen now. So how do we, as critical thinkers, navigate this terrain of historical parallels and anxieties about the future? It feels like such a minefield of potential biases and misinterpretations.
Well, I think the first step is recognizing that history is complex, and drawing these neat parallels between different eras can be super misleading.
So it's not about dismissing historical comparisons altogether, but about using them thoughtfully, with a critical eye for nuance and context.
Exactly. Context matters. We need to understand the unique circumstances of each historical event, the social, political, and economic forces at play, to really assess whether those same forces are present today. And it's also about recognizing that our own perspectives are shaped by our personal experiences and beliefs, just as the YouTubers are.
Right. We all have our biases, our own fears, our own anxieties that might color how we interpret events.
Exactly. So self-awareness is key. We need to be mindful of our own preconceived notions, our own emotional baggage as we engage with information-informed opinions.
It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves as well, examining our own thoughts and feelings to see how they might be influencing our judgments.
Precisely. Critical thinking isn't just about, scrutinizing external sources of information. It's also about examining our own internal thought processes.
So in a way, this deep dive isn't just about Hypatia or the current political climate. It's about developing the skills to be informed, engaged, critically thinking citizens. In a world that's awash in information and misinformation, it's about asking those tough questions, digging deeper, and not just taking everything at face value.
Yeah, that's a really powerful takeaway. And as we kind of move forward, let's remember the YouTuber's closing message about the importance of active citizenship. Even though her message is wrapped in, a package of anxieties, her core message resonates.
Right, she might be expressing her anxieties in a rather dramatic way, but her core message is one that resonates deeply. We have a responsibility to engage with the world around us, to speak out against injustice, and to hold those in power accountable.
And that's a message that transcends any particular political moment or historical parallel. It's a timeless call to action. A reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future we want to see. Which brings us back to Hypatia and her legacy.
Right. What can we learn from her story, both in terms of her brilliance, but also her tragic fate?
Well, she was a woman who dared to think differently, to challenge the status quo. And ultimately, she paid the ultimate price for her courage.
Yeah. Her story is a reminder of the fragility of progress, that ever-present threat of ignorance and intolerance.
But it also highlights the enduring power of ideas, the potential for human ingenuity, to light the way forward even in the darkest of times.
And perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of the Astrolabe, right? It's a tool for navigating the complexities of the world, for seeking knowledge, for understanding our place in the universe. It represents that inherent curiosity and that desire to understand the world around us.
Yeah, it's a symbol of human striving, our relentless pursuit of understanding, a pursuit that continues even in the face of adversity. And, as we navigate our own uncertain times, I think it's important to remember the legacy of Hypatia, the brilliant woman who dared to reach for the stars, and let her story inspire us to keep seeking knowledge, to keep asking questions, and to keep fighting for a better future.
Beautifully said. I think it's also important to note that Hypatia, while a woman of science and reason, also existed within a society that embraced a multitude of beliefs and practices, including the ones that the YouTuber espouses, like astrology.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
It's kind of intriguing to consider how Hypatia, a woman of science and reason, might reconcile with the YouTuber's anxieties, which are heavily infused with astrology and past life beliefs. Talk about a clash of worldviews. Hypatia, the logician, meets the astrologer grappling with a witch's wound. I wonder if they'd find any common ground.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the different ways that people try to find meaning and make sense of the world. After all, they're both seeking understanding, right? Albeit through very different frameworks. Hypatia, with her astrolabe, sought to map the heavens, understand these physical laws that govern the universe.
And the YouTuber is kind of trying to map the human psyche, right? Using astrology and past life beliefs to try to understand her own anxieties and the, kind of turbulent world around her.
Exactly. They're both seeking patterns, connections, explanations for the, complexities that they observe.
So maybe the common ground lies in that shared human desire for knowledge, that human impulse to try to make sense of the world around us, whether it's through science or spirituality, or maybe a blend of both.
It's a fascinating thought. And it suggests that perhaps there's more room for dialogue and understanding between these seemingly disparate perspectives than we might initially assume.
Maybe Hypatia would see the YouTuber's anxieties as a reflection of just the human condition, right? Our innate fear of the unknown, our struggle to find meaning in a world that often feels so chaotic and unpredictable.
And perhaps she would remind us that knowledge, in all its forms, can be a powerful antidote to fear, a way of illuminating the darkness and finding our way forward.
Which brings us back to that call to action, that urge to engage, to speak out, to try to shape the future. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by, all the complexities of the world, to succumb to apathy or despair. I know I sometimes feel that way.
But Hypatia's story is a reminder that, each individual has the potential to make a difference, to challenge injustice, to contribute to that collective pursuit of knowledge and progress.
Even small acts of courage, like speaking truth to power, can have ripple effects, and create a wave of change.
And as we conclude this deep dive, let's remember that we're not passive observers of history. We're active participants in shaping its course.
Our choices matter. Our actions matter. Our voices matter. All contribute to this ongoing narrative of, humanity.
And as we move forward, let's try to embody the spirit of Hypatia, the brilliant woman who dared to think differently, who sought knowledge fearlessly, and who ultimately left an indelible mark on the world, even in the face of tragedy.
Yeah, beautifully said. So to wrap things up, we explored the life and tragic end of Hypatia, a brilliant mind silenced by intolerance.
Right.
And we kind of grappled with this very personal, very thought-provoking perspective on current events, filtered through this lens of history and personal beliefs.
And remember, this was just one YouTuber's interpretation. And while some of her claims may have been extreme, they highlighted the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Especially in a world like today, where information and misinformation spreads so rapidly.
Yeah, exactly. We always encourage you to question, to investigate, to form your own informed opinions. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final provocative thought. If Hypatia were alive today, what would she make of our world? What insights might she offer? What warnings might she sound? What hopes might she hold for the future? These are questions worth pondering.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop seeking knowledge.